Hey everybody, Troy from the Do-It-Yourself World and the Off-Grid Project. We are at Mill Creek in Mackinaw, and this is all recreated. It's beautiful. There is what it looked like when they first found it. Actually, that's after digging. Inside, actually, that can be seen inside the fireplace, and they recreated it based on authentic techniques. And I am here enjoying it because I love the lumber mill business, and it's very, very interesting to see how they did it and to learn some of the things. I hope the audio is good because there's a lot of loud running water and cars going by outside.
Using the felling axe. The felling axe has a big, heavy, wedge-shaped head, and the heavier this head, the better. Because as you swing this axe, you're going to build up a lot of momentum. And the more weight, the more momentum, the more energy you can throw into that tree, and the faster and easier it was to chop down. Once you've chopped down that tree, you'll quarter it up into sections, and you'll bring it back to a work site. Then you can begin to work and process that log. Before you touch it with your tools again, you need to lift those logs up off the ground. That way your axes and other blades don't run through the dirt. You don't want to dull them on that sandy soil or chip them on rock. So instead, you lift them up onto blocks of wood, much like these down here, called saddle blocks. Now they're just blocks of wood, but oftentimes you carve a groove or a notch into that block to help saddle that log into place. It makes it much easier to work on top of. Now I don't know about you folks, but standing on a round log on a square board and swinging an axe between my legs doesn't sound like a great idea. But the French and the British, they solved that problem, or had a solution for that problem. They used this tool right here to help them. Does anyone know what this is called, or what this resembles? Think office supplies. Staples, yes. This was called a log dog, or a saddle dog. The term dog in this case means fastener. So it's essentially a log fastener, a giant staple. You'd hammer one end into your block, one end into the log. If you do that on both sides, that log is now secured together. It's not going to roll out from underneath you. Now, I've done that back here behind me, so I can take my felling axe one more time, stand on top of this log, and I can make notches every couple of inches down the length of that log. And I'd continue down the length of that log. Now once I've loosened up that bark, I need a second tool to help shape that log. For that, I need this axe right here. This axe has a big broad head to it. It's called the broad axe. Axes have really easy naming schemes. The broad axe is shaped differently than that felling axe though. It's not a big giant wedge. It has a very narrow blade. The backside is flat. Only the front side has that beveled edge. This makes it work just like a giant chisel. And that's essentially what we're doing, is chiseling away the side of that lumber. The other difference? My handle. My handle is not quite straight. It has a slight curve to it. Oh. This curve is intentional. This is a safety feature for this axe. What this does is protect your hands. As you swing the axe, if you miss the log, or as you're coming down the log, you need something to keep your hands away from the side of that log. That curved handle moves my hands just off to the side. Most ideally. Now there are many different sizes and shapes to these broad axes. This right here is my French broad axe. This is actually a medium-sized axe. They got much larger. Some of the largest ones were closer to 10 to 15 pounds. So you didn't so much as swing them as you'd line them up and you'd drop them down. Some of the smallest ones were about the size of your hand. The early hatchets were designed this way. They weren't the wedges that we use today. Now I prefer to use the British broad axe. Theirs is a little bit smaller than the French one here. It's about this size. Now we're not exactly sure why the British had a smaller axe. Best guess is this is a lot easier to use. It's a lot lighter and easier to transport. But it has the same design features. It has that flat backside and beveled front side, and that curved handle. So it does the same kind of work. Now ideally, I'll be able to come up to my log then and go in between my notches, and I'll be able to cleave off that bark.
Yeah.
And I get that flat surface. I run that flat surface down the length of the log, repeat that on each side, until I'm left with a square beam. Those beams can then be used to help build up the support structure of my home. Or I can turn those beams into boards. But to make a board, I need a saw blade. And at Fort Mitchell in Mackinaw, they had the 2-man pit saw available to them. Now my pit saw is up here on sawhorses. Those may have been used. It's very easy to move those from job site to job site. They probably weren't used at Fort Mitchell in Mackinaw because this method has 2 big drawbacks that are very easy to overcome. The first drawback is you have to make sure you don't cut through the sawhorse. Someone's going to be standing on that and they're not going to appreciate that falling apart. So instead you'd have to push the log forward a little bit, cut a little extra, push the log back, take the saw out, unpin the saw, move it around, repin the saw, continue cutting, do the same thing at the other end. It's a lot of extra work just for one board. The larger drawback though was having to lift those logs up above your head. It was much easier instead to keep the logs on the ground and instead dig a pit. You'll need 1 man and a shovel to dig a pit. You'd put a man down inside that pit and do all your work there at that ground level. Now the man down inside that pit, he was called the pit man. He didn't have a very fun job. You ever heard the old expression, my job's the pits? Terrible, awful, dirty, rotten job? We believe that came from the pit man. He'd be down those pits all day. It'd be hot. That sun would be beating down on him. If it was raining, there'd be some water collecting down there. That pit man's gonna be caked in sawdust. As he cuts through that lumber, that sawdust rains down on top of him all day. And the pit man, he's doing the majority of the work. Now it's a 2-man saw, but the teeth of the pit saw, they face downwards. So the only time it cuts is when the pit man is pulling down. Now luckily for me, I have my pit man right here, so I don't have to do all that work. But my job up top is to be the tiller man. The tiller man, much like the tiller man on a ship, has to steer the saw blade. If I don't steer this in a straight line, I've cut a useless board. And I've wasted a lot of time and effort.
You might have been that all day.
Mackinaw.
Oh.
But it's just like, it's just easy.
You can do this all day with me? Okay. Gotta go get lunch. No, I won't do that to him. We'll call it in 3 and 1. Thank you very much. Give my pitman a round of applause. Now, 2 men working all day this way, they would be expected to cut between 10 and 12 boards a day. Now, that's not a lot by today's standards, but that was fast enough for Fort Mitchell and Mackinaw. Fort Mitchell and Mackinaw had 65 years to grow in size. It started as a small French trading post, grew into a larger fort, and then eventually into the larger fort that we've reconstructed today. So, a few weeks to get enough lumber to, say, cover my barn wasn't a terrible amount of time. But the British were the last occupants of that fort. They would need a way to produce lumber faster. In the late 1770s, early 1780s, Great Britain was fighting a war. Can anyone tell me what war that was? It was the Revolutionary War, yes. The British were fighting the American colonies. Now the British, during that time, decided that being in a wooden fort on the beach probably wasn't the most strategic location. So they moved their fort over to Mackinac Island. But there was more than just a fort with soldiers at Fort Mitchell and Mackinac. There had been a small town that had grown up, both inside and surrounding the outside of that fort. And the British wanted those townsfolk to move with them to the island. They would need a sawmill to produce lumber to help speed up the process of rebuilding that town, because they no longer had 65 years to rebuild. Luckily for us, there was a man by the name of Robert Campbell who was farming in this area, and his creek was deemed suitable to be able to build a mill. Now we're not sure exactly if Campbell himself built the mill, or if someone came out and he hired someone to build it for him, or if the British themselves supplied someone to build it. Or maybe the Americans at that point. But the mill was put in here, and that mill helped this area become the first industrial complex in the Great Lakes. This mill that was here, there was also a grist mill here, and he was also farming. Robert Campbell would use his sawmill to provide lumber for Mackinac Island. He'd use his farm to provide food. With that supplies here, he established that first industrial complex. Now, Robert Campbell, he could only run his mill in the springtime. That's the only time of the year there's enough water to continuously run his mill all day. But when he could run all day, he could cut between 100 and 150 boards a day. So he was moving at least 10 times as fast as that two-man pit saw. Does anyone have any questions about anything I've said or shown here? If you folks would like, we'll make our way over to that saw. Robert Campbell's sawmill. It's not the original mill. That original mill was in operation from about 1790 until about the mid-1830s, early 1840s. And we believe it was abandoned and later destroyed by the railroad companies when they were coming through this area laying down railroad tracks. But we've constructed our mill based off of mills that were in operation in the same time period. So we believe Robert Campbell would be at least familiar with this design. How it works is water will come from behind the dam, down the sluiceway, and it'll fill up the crib, which is below your folks' feet here in front of me. Once that crib is filled, I'll spin this flywheel, and that'll open a small gate in the bottom of that crib. And all that water, with a vast amount of pressure, is going to squeeze through a very narrow open gate and land onto the flutter wheel. That's what looks like a big riverboat paddle wheel underneath. And that's what's powering the mill. Connected to the flutter wheel is a pole arm called the pitman's arm. And the pitman's arm has the same job as a saw pitman. It causes my saw blade to move up and down. That's all it does is move up and down. Robert Campbell needed a way to feed his lumber through the mill. So he'd harness the extra energy of his saw, and he converts the vertical energy into horizontal energy using the ratchet assembly system up top. So as my saw moves up and down, this beam up top is going to teeter up and down. That causes this beam it's connected to rock or ratchet back and forth. And that pushes this pole arm forward and backwards. This forward motion when put into gear lands onto my rag wheel and pushes my rag wheel forward. Connected to the rag wheel is an axle, and that axle has teeth on it that line up to the teeth here on my sleigh. So as that rag wheel turns or that axle turns, my sleigh also moves. Does that make sense? All right. I'm going to wiggle my magic fingers here and do something Robert Campbell wished he could do. Press the magic button. And I'll allow that water to fill up our crib. All right. With that filled up, I'll go ahead and power up the mill. Careful, sir. You might want to lean back a little bit. This is going to go up and down.
Oh wow, it's fast. Look at that. 4 seconds on it, yeah.
Now Robert Campbell, when he was cutting his boards, he wouldn't have cut his boards all the way to the very end of the log. He would stop with a few inches left, reverse the sleigh so that his blade ends back up in the foot block. He then moves the log over and starts a new board. That way all the boards stay together for transportation to Mackinac Island. It's much easier to send a log down with all the boards attached to it than it is to double carry every individual board. So Campbell would drag the logs out of the mill, take his wrap shackles, and he would shackle together the ends of all the logs. Excuse me. Fly in the throat. Once those logs were connected together, they could be dragged down to the beach and then either loaded up onto ships or hooked up to the back of ships and towed over to the island. Once over on the island and taken to their individual work sites, a worker can take a handsaw and saw loose all the boards. Those boards fall loose and you're left with a discarded piece of lumber called a stub shot. These stubs were generally destroyed, they were good for firewood. However, in the 1970s, the state park learned not all of Robert Campbell's stump shots had been destroyed. In the 1970s, the state park was renovating Mission House and Mission Church over on Mackinac Island. Our carpenters peeled open the walls, found stump shots like these, tucked up in the walls, filling up all the nooks and crannies. We're not exactly sure why they were there. Most likely, they're probably being used as a form of insulation to help block against that cold draft. But since they were there, we were very glad that we found them, because we were able to dissect these stump shots and learn a lot about Robert Campbell's saw blade. We learned he was using an iron blade, not a steel blade. Now, steel was available at the time, but it was very expensive. And it would have been difficult to repair, but a softer iron blade could be repaired by Campbell himself, most likely. We also learned that as that saw stroked up and down, it moved forward at about 1/3 of an inch with every stroke, so we could get the gearing right for our mill. And we learned that the curve of the saw teeth were not straight up and down on top of each other, they overlap each other quite a bit, so that he cut a much larger area than his saw blade actually was. That way he wasn't binding in the back. Now, since Campbell's not cutting to the very end of the log, he needs a reverse mechanism. For that, there's a second wheel down below called the tub wheel. The tub wheel spins counterclockwise and is connected to a vertical axle that leads to the lantern gear. The lantern gear looks much like an old-time railroad lantern, and it lines up to my ride wheel. So when I pull this lever to engage that gear, then allow water onto the tub wheel, we reverse the entire mechanism. Does anyone have any questions?
Here, that's the crib that Tree told you about. That he fills with water. When he opens up his flywheel, that allows water to flow onto the flutter wheel. That big cattle looking wheel there. That for the flutter wheel is the pitchman's arm, which will work up and down and lift the saw up and down just like I did over that saw.
So there's a dam over here, and there's water flowing through here, and he opens up the gate, and it powers the saw.
Next to the flutter wheel here, that round wheel, that's the tub wheel, or the turbine wheel. Connected to the axle, there's the lantern gear at the top. So he'll turn his flywheel, allow water to flow down onto the flutter wheel, and move the advanced log into the saw. Then he'll stop that, and then engage the tub wheel, and back the log away from it.
Wow. Look at that. You can see the shaft going up and down. This one's driving the saw blade. You can see the shaft going up and down, and this is in the drive rail to advance the wood. Up there he's cranking the wheel. Oh wow. Oh wow, that's actually pretty too. You like that? Yeah.
It's interesting to me that just that little time, we've raised the street level by about 8 inches.
Wow.
Like if you come down here when the mill isn't running, this is, well, it's not the rise, but it's only maybe 2 or 3 inches deep on average. There are, of course, deeper spots, shallow spots. There's 1, 2, 3 deep, up with those plants.
Now here is a pond, and they say, I've been asking questions off camera, this fills up throughout a period of a day in off-peak seasons when it's not rainy season. And this will empty in an hour of running the mill. This pond will empty out in an hour. It's mind-blowing how much water can be used up. So if it wasn't springtime and the snow melt period and rainy season, he couldn't run all day. In the peak rainy season, he could run all day on the mill. Otherwise, he could only run an hour at a time once it filled up. The demonstrations of the day so far, just running a couple minutes at a time, have lowered the water level 2 inches. And you'll see the demonstration is very brief. But they have to keep it brief in order to have enough water to show all day, because it hasn't rained in a couple days and it's getting drier here. So I'm inside a house containing a bunch of tools and equipment back in the day. Everything was made of wood. And this is what they used. The mill was used to build Mackinaw City and the fort when they rebuilt and moved to the island. This looks like a foot-powered wood lathe. I definitely see that goes up and down, turning the wheel with a belt that turns the wood lathe. Look at that. That is really cool. Oh yeah, you would sit on that side. So in case the audio wasn't good, that is the original sawmill. It ran by 2 men, one on top and one on the bottom, and the guy underneath, I think he said it was called a pit mill. The guy underneath was in the pit, and they could only cut a few inches at a time. Then they had to reposition the log, reposition the saw, and then cut a few inches at a time and reposition everything, cut a few inches. That was horrible. And you could cut one board in an hour. That is just horribly slow. Can you imagine? He said it would take about a week to cover this barn. Now the water mill, on the other hand, was able to do 10 times as fast. And so I think he said you could do like 10 boards an hour with the water mill, which is way, way better. And just like your modern sawmill, this is on a rail, and the log feeds into the saw blade. There's the rails. Oh, it's wood. Everything's wood. Heavily greased wood. Really, really impressive. And there's the sluice gate. And that can go forward and backwards. Really, really amazing. And this was the design, I read it came from European technology, and hundreds of years old, one of the first designs for the mill, for an automated mill. Really cool. I learned a couple terms today, or the reasoning behind some of the terms, which is neat too. And now I don't feel so bad about my chainsaw. The chainsaw mill is a little bit faster than this. I think he said, what, 10 boards an hour? About the same, maybe, equivalent. So my chainsaw mill isn't too bad compared to this. I'm comparing myself to modern stuff, to the super, super fast mills. Oh, he's ringing the bell. There's another tour going to come on in here soon. So I got a personal demonstration of that. Really amazing. The shavings actually are what he did. Well, they showed me. So you sit on the bench facing this way, and you put your workpiece in there, and then you press with your feet forward, and it locks your workpiece down onto the bench. And then there's a draw knife, which I happen to have at home, and you can shave your shingles or whatever you're working on this bench with the draw knife. Really cool. Here's another different form, just a different type of locking mechanism on top. You can see all the shingles they've been shaving. But also there's various tools that they can make in here. There's different things they've used it for. There's a different formed piece. He was going to show me an axe handle, but it's not here now. That is beautiful. Do you feel it moving?
Yeah.
It's moving a lot. The tower we're on is shaking a lot. That is beautiful. There's Mackinac Bridge. We can't get under the shade of canopy here? There it is, way out there. 5 mile long bridge. A relatively long bridge in the world. A little hazy today. What a beautiful sight. Often you can see freighters coming through here. Sorry if there's any shaking in the camera now. It's because the platform we're on is moving a lot under my feet. I believe that's Mackinac Island. And there is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you look here, follow the bridge, and then we're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And then Mackinac Island. Really beautiful up here. And then you can see the grounds. Oh, there's the creek. Let me see, what am I looking at? There's the pond for the sawmill, backed up by the dam. And then can't really see much else from here. Yeah, it's behind the trees. You can barely see it up in there between the trees. Well, unless I see something else out here to record, that's pretty much it for this trip, for this tour, this section of our day. It was going to be 90 degrees down home today, and it was already getting extremely hot. So we decided to come to Mackinaw, the beautiful city of Mackinaw. I never get tired of Mackinaw. And it's a nice and cozy, comfy 73 degrees today. So nice, and the smells and everything are so nice. If you've never been to Mackinaw, you got to see it once in your life. It's incredible. Well, this is Troy from the Do-It-Yourself World and the Off-Grid Project. I hope you enjoyed the video and the tour. Talk to y'all later.